Good morning. It's Wednesday, April 1st, April Fool's Day, but I'm not going to have an April Fool's joke for you today. Not really much sense. I think our world's kind of funky right now and don't need any April Fool's jokes. Our today's question is, what term refers to the situation that most poor families in the U.S. that are headed by women? What is that term? Okay. Um, we stopped off yesterday. I was getting ready to start on the interpreting statistics of social mobility. Um, the U.S. is famous for its intergenerational mobility. Children can pass their parents on their way up the social class ladder. That is one of the attractions of this country. Um, most apples don't fall far from the tree, though. Children who are born into the poorest 10% of America, about one third are still there when they grow up. Children who are born to the richest 10% of families is about one third of them are still there also. So you don't change a whole lot. And that apple doesn't fall too far away from the tree is an expression that's been used over the years to say that, you're pretty much like your parents. And I know some of you that may be a shock, and you may be sitting there shaking your head. No, I'm nothing like my parents. Unfortunately, you probably are. Chances are there's a high percentage of you who are going to get some kind of a career that aligns with what your parents do. And when I say that, I'll say that it's the social class standing that you'll have. There'll be some that'll move up or move down, but most of you will probably stay right in that same area where your parents are. The statistics just prove it out. There's not much difference. There's not a lot of proof otherwise. Okay. Um, if the glass is half empty or half full, the answer depends upon what part those findings you emphasize. Two-thirds of the very poorest kids move up, and two-thirds of the very rich kids move down. Okay. So one third stays the same, two-thirds move. So really, it's not as gloom and doom situation as you think, but it is kind of set where it is. Okay. There is a lot of social mobility, but what is the truth? Remember, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. You can stress either part of these findings depending upon what you want to prove. In all this, we don't want to lose sight of the broader principle. The benefits that high income parents enjoy tend to keep their children afloat. The obstacles that low income parents confront tend to weigh their children down. So that's kind of the gist of it. Um, and I thought that was an interesting quote, that statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. Okay. And you could look at any argument today, and if you can make that argument fit your side of the disagreement by using statistics, if you use the statistics the right way. Okay. Look at what we're told every day right now about the coronavirus. We're told about how many new cases, how many deaths. When they're confronted and asked about, well, how many people have recovered, we start getting a runaround. Well, it's hard to calculate, yada, yada. I watch one guy on YouTube channels that every day tries to give the best knowledge he has as far as information wise on actual recoveries. And he'll flat out and tell you that some of these statistics are not accurate, but he tries to give those statistics to show that it's not all completely doom and gloom. Look at the gun debate issues. You can take statistics and twist them and make them fit your side of that issue and make them be very, very convincing. Okay, so statistics are good and they prove a lot, but you need to check the source who's throwing those statistics out there and see what they're really wanting to prove. Are they only going on their agenda? Are they being honest and forthwith and giving you the exact statistics that you can use? Okay. The pain of social mobility is the next part in the book. If you were knocked down the social class ladder, it would be painful, but it also hurts to climb the ladder. Sociologist Steph Law found that British women who had moved from the working class to the middle class were caught between two worlds, their working class background and their current middle class life. The women's mothers found their daughters' middle class ways uppity and criticized their daughters' taste in furniture and food, their speech, and even the way they reared their children. Uh, this part put a lot of stress on the relationship between mothers and daughters. Sociologists Richard Sennett and Jonathan Cobb studied working class parents in Boston. They found something similar to the British study. Parents made deep sacrifices working two jobs, postponing medical care just so their children could go to college. They expected their children to appreciate their sacrifice. The result was two worlds of experience. The children educated world was so unique that their parents, that children and their parents had difficulty talking to one another. The parents felt betrayed and bitter. Um, I'm watching something on Netflix in the evenings called The All American, and there is a struggle between a father who is a coach of a high school team and his dad because the son moved out of an inner city area, married a wealthy lady. He had been in the pros, so it wasn't like he just married her for her money. So that's not the issue there. But the dad still lives in the inner city, and him and his son through this show, when they do communicate with each other, it's not a good form of communication. So this would go along with what this research has showed. And I don't know about any of you if you have family situations where your parents might be better educated than your grandparents, and maybe it caused some strife between your parents and grandparents. Now, I don't know if that's happened, but it does happen. And that's what this study brings out. Um, those who made the jump from working to the middle class always feel a tearing away of their roots and never become comfortable with their new social classes. We move into poverty. So, and poverty, to determine who is poor, the U.S. government draws a poverty line. This measure was set in the 1960s, where poor people were thought to spend about 1/3 of their incomes on food. Each year, the government computes the low cost food budget and manipulates it by 3. Um, families with those, and multiplies it by 3, sorry. Families with those incomes are less than this amount are classified as poor. Those whose incomes are higher, even by $1, are determined to be not poor. So what they do is they take an average low cost food budget and multiply it by 3. So now where they get their statistics, I don't know. They research this. They probably check average bills that people have for food, and then find the lowest and multiply it by 3, and that's where the poverty line comes from. So even if you make $1 more than what that amount is, you're not considered poor. Now, I hope that you're thinking right now that that really doesn't come out right. How is that? How is $1 keeping you from being considered poor? Well, that's what statistics do for you. And that's what sociologists come up and say, this is what it is. Okay. And that's the government also, they have qualifications, and they don't care. You can be $1 over or $1 under, and you either qualify or don't qualify for something. And that's kind of how it is. Good, bad, or indifferent. Okay. The official measure of poverty is inadequate. Poor people actually spend only about 20% of their incomes on food. So to determine poverty lines, they ought to multiply their food budget by 5 instead of 3. So another problem is that mothers who work outside the home and have to pay for childcare are treated the same as mothers who don't have this expense. The poverty line is also the same for everyone across the nation, even though the cost of living is much higher in New York than it is in Alabama. Much of the income of the poor goes uncounted: food stamps, rent assistance, subsidized childcare, and earned income tax credit. So all those things play into their income, but it isn't counted when they start figuring out for this poverty line. Okay. Now, geography. If you look at page 283 in your book, there is a map of poverty in the United States. Now, this is a clustering of poverty. There is a clustering of poverty in the South that has been around for more than 150 years. The rate of rural poverty, which is 16%, is higher than the national average of 12%. Why is the rural area so poor? The rural poor are less likely to be single parents and more likely to be married and to have jobs compared with urban Americans. The rural poor are less educated, and the jobs available to them pay less than similar jobs in urban areas. Geography is not the main factor in poverty. The greatest predictors of poverty are race, ethnicity, education, and the sex of the person who leads the family. Okay. If we look at down to earth on page 282, I don't know if everybody had their books with you, but what I'm going to do is I'm kind of slide through this a little bit. It takes taking another fun quiz, exploring the stereotypes about the poor. The first statement is most poor people are lazy. They are poor because they do not want to work. And that's a false statement. Half of the poor are either too old or too young to work. About 40% are under age 18. Another 10% are 65 or older. About 30% of the working age poor work at least half the year. Okay. The next one. Most of the poor are trapped in a cycle of poverty that few escape. False. Long-term poverty is the exception. Most poverty lasts less than a year. Only 12% remain in poverty for 5 or more consecutive years. Most children who are born in poverty are not poor as adults. And all these are from different studies that were done. There is more poverty in rural than in urban areas. And that's true. We already kind of discussed that. So we talked about that just a little bit already. Most African Americans are poor. This is false. This one was easy. We just reviewed some statistics in the box on upward mobility on page 280. Plus, you have the bar chart below. So if you look on page 282, there's a bar chart below this down to earth that shows race, ethnicity, and U.S. poverty. Okay. The next statement: most of the poor are African Americans. False. Look at the second part of figure 10.6. There are more poor whites than any other group. That combined total of poor African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans, however, is larger than the total of poor whites. The next statement: most of the poor are single mothers and children. False. About 38% of the poor match this stereotype. About 34% of the poor live in married couple families, and 22% live alone or with non-relatives, and about 6% live in other settings. Okay. The next statement: most of the poor live in the inner city. This is also false. About 42% of the poor do live in the inner city, but 36% live in the suburbs and 22% live in small towns and rural areas. The next statement: most of the poor live on welfare. False. Only about 25% of the income of the poor adults comes from welfare. About half comes from wages and pensions, and about 22% comes from Social Security. Okay. And the last statement: on a percentage basis, more children than adults are poor, and this is true. Okay, no one holds this stereotype. The author just wanted to make sure that it was an important point, and he'll come back to it shortly. Okay, so that is kind of the misconceptions in some areas about poverty and about the poor. Okay, race and ethnicity. One of the strongest factors in poverty is race and ethnicity. Figure 10.6 on page 282 shows that only 10% of Asian Americans and whites are poor, while 21% of Latinos live in poverty, and 24% of African Americans, and 27% of Native Americans. Since whites are by far the largest group in the U.S., their much lower rate of poverty still translates into larger numbers. As a result, there are more poor whites than poor people of any other racial or ethnic group. Okay. Education is the next area that we hit. Education is a vital factor in poverty. The figure on page 284 shows that 3 out of 100 people will finish college, end up in poverty, but 1 in 4 people who drop out of high school are poor. The chance that someone will be poor becomes less with each higher level of education. This principle applies regardless of the race or ethnicity, but it shows that at any level of education, race, ethnicity makes an important impact. The feminization of poverty, which goes along with our question today, if you were following along. One of the best indicators of whether or not a family is poor is the family structure. Families headed by both a mother and a father are least likely to be poor. Families headed by only one mother are more likely to be poor. The reason for this can be summed up in this one statistic. Women average only 70% of what men earn. This is still true today. We've talked about it before in other chapters. With our high rate of divorce combined with our high number of births to single women, mother-headed families have become more common. Sociologists call this association of poverty, which is called the feminization of poverty. Okay. Going to finish up with old age today. The elderly are less likely than the general population to be poor. It used to be that growing old increased people's chances of being poor, but government policies to redistribute income, Social Security, and subsidize housing, food stamps, and other Medicare slash that rate of poverty among the elderly. Okay. We'll wrap it up here today. I told you I'll try to go between 10 and 20 minutes each day. We'll start off. Well, let me finish with children first. Let me just get children out of the way, and then we'll start looking at dynamics of poverty tomorrow. Okay. So children are more likely to live in poverty than adults or the elderly. This holds true regardless of race or ethnicity. The fact is that millions of U.S. children are reared in poverty is shocking when one considers the wealth of this country and the supposed concern for the well-being of children. This tragic aspect of poverty is a topic of thinking critically on page 284. If you look at page 284 and 285 and read that thinking critically, it talks about children being poor. Okay. And with that, I'll close out. Do your question today. I sent mass emails out to everybody. I'm asking that you reply to that email so I know that you're getting the work on Teams, and I know that you're at least able to check out these lecture notes. I realize they're probably more boring than sitting in class. I can't really ask you questions and try to get responses. Can't really discuss anything. Makes doing activities a little bit harder. I'm still trying to figure out a way. I really would like to have you guys watch the Breakfast Club and do the questions and stuff that I have. But what I would do is I would retype all those questions and put it in the Teams app so that you could just reply there. You don't have to worry about trying to print and retype and scan and email and all this stuff. But what I need is I need all my sociology students to message me through email and let me know if you're able to watch the Breakfast Club. If I get enough people who say they are, then I'll go ahead and make that assignment for the first of next week, because it does look at social class. You have 5 individuals put in a Saturday detention who all come from very distinct social backgrounds. And it's just a good thing to go along with social class in the United States. So that's what I'll try to do. If everybody could message me and let me know whether or not you can actually get access to watch the Breakfast Club. I know it's on Amazon, but I had to buy it on Amazon. That's why I'm able to show it in class. But unfortunately, Amazon hasn't relaxed their restrictions, and so I'm not able to take it and give you a link to go watch it. So if you could message me and let me know, and then I'll kind of go from there, and I'll see what's going to happen. We'll meet again tomorrow. Friday is considered a planning day, so that teachers are going to get together in their subject matters and discuss things and work on ways to share ideas on what everyone is doing to try to make contact with all our students. I hope you guys are staying safe, and hopefully again we'll get together in May and maybe finish out 2 or 3 weeks of school and get things back to a little bit more to normal. Be safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll be back tomorrow.